Yeah, sure thing. So why don't we start with introductions and maybe conclude with Lawrence, and he can give a longer introduction of himself. So I'll start. This is Adam Cole, one of your now 3 SEMA business reps. Zeb.
Hey, everybody. Zeb Feldman, SEMA OE3 senior business rep. I said, oh, we are now called agents, senior business agent. So just for everyone's edification. Doesn't mean any difference. Our job specs didn't change or anything. They just changed our name. I'm not quite entirely sure why. And we are joined by several members of our board. I see, why don't we start with Mary Beth and then we'll go on from there.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Beth Rogers. I am on the SEMA Executive Board as a member at large.
And I saw Jesse sneak in. Why don't you, not sneak, come in. Jesse, why don't you say hi?
Hi, hello, everyone. This is Jesse Castaneda. I'm a member at large and I work at BMC's Emergency Department and Admitting Department.
Great. Welcome, Jesse. And I did lastly see Robin. I could have sworn I saw Robin. If you want to say hi, Robin.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Robin Rivas Romano. I am a SEMA board member at large and I work at the Social Services Agency.
Are there any other board members here? If so, please feel free to unmute yourself and say hi to everybody. Looks like not.
Any others?
Okay, well, go ahead. I mean, we do have I don't know how full it'll be. I guess a lot of it depends on the amount of discussion, but we certainly have a robust agenda for today. And Lawrence has not yet joined us. So Adam, why don't you take the first topic and I'll wrangle him up.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, thanks for joining, folks. Looks like we got a full meeting today. So first topic we'll be addressing is vaccine mandate and accommodation updates. So some of this information is going back a little bit, but it'll be the first opportunity we've had to discuss it with most HHS folks, as it's now been, I think, 5 weeks since the last BMC site meeting. And at least at other sites, we found there was not really robust information sharing about this topic. So we'll try to give folks kind of an overview of what's happened in the last month or so on the vaccine mandate and exemption and accommodation process. So EOD concluded largely their processing of individual vaccine exemption requests, be they for religious or medical exemptions, and turn those results around to individuals. What we found is that most people who submitted religious accommodations and medical accommodations saw those requests approved. What that meant for the individual affected, though, is that they were then put in the accommodation process. The first part of that process is that individual agencies working with county council made a designation of every person's position who received an accommodation. And that was an evaluation of the position the incumbent held, not of the individual necessarily. So if I was approved for an exemption, my boss or the executive above me, if I worked in the county, would have made an analysis of my position and whether it was a low, medium, or high risk to the public to accommodate me in that position, given my unvaccinated status. I'm not unvaccinated, I'm vaccinated, but imagine I've been approved for an exemption, right? And up to that point in the process, several things seem to have gone a bit sideways. I would preface this by saying I think BMC and the other hospitals have done a better job with this process than at least the other sites that I represent. And part of what went poorly with the process was that County Council, ESA, the Central Executive Office didn't provide any direction to individual agencies or executives about what kind of criteria should lead the departments to classify positions as low, medium, or high risk. So for example, I would say largely, I think, BMC, for example, got a lot of these designations right, and I think positions were reasonably classified. But we might look to another area, for example, like public health or behavioral health, where we had some classifications that are used both at VMC or O'Connor or St. Louise and public health or behavioral health. Obviously in the hospital setting, those are physicians that work in the hospital, and you'll work offsite in an office somewhere if you're in public health or behavioral health. And in behavioral health and public health, the positions were classified by their leadership as high risk, but classified as medium risk by our hospital executives, right? I think this process was largely led up by Sonia Menzies for the hospital system. And that just creates the obviously illogical situation where we're telling someone, a nurse, for example, in behavioral health, you're high risk in this position here. The result of that is the county saying we cannot accommodate you in this position. You need to look for a position somewhere else and apply for it, open, competitive, or transfer. And oh, look, you could go do the exact same job you're doing right now, but in the hospital setting. And there's no way in the world that that represents a safer situation for the public or for our clients here. Moving someone to do the same job from working in an office in public health into a hospital setting, right? It's just obviously backwards. It doesn't make any sense. And that's unfortunately what's happened in some cases. So what it means for folks who had their positions classified low, medium, or high, if your position was classified as low or medium, then you are able to be accommodated in place with masking and testing. If you're low risk, you can wear a cloth mask and you test once a week. Medium risk is an N95 and you wear and you test twice a week. For high risk, like I said, that means the county's saying you cannot be accommodated in your current position. The only accommodation they're offering is that folks were placed on an unpaid leave of absence, and they were told they're welcome to look on the county website to apply for other positions in the county. So that status, from what we can tell, has not impacted a significant number of SEMA folks. As we've talked about, many times, SEMA is overwhelmingly, both vaccinated and in fact pro-vaccine mandate. That being said, some numbers of folks were impacted, and I think every case but one now we've managed to find individual solutions for folks that were impacted, which has been good. And in some cases, that's been, pushing back on what we would see as a department's inappropriate classification for someone as high risk. But we're seeing, for example, there's been a lot of RMPA nurses that have been classified, right, as high risk. And while I haven't spoken to RMPA in the last week or so about this, they were having quite a bit of trouble with the county on that front. And the reality is that most nursing positions that, wouldn't be in direct patient contact and could be classified as low or medium risk, those are going to end up being SEMA positions. And we just know there aren't a lot of available vacant SEMA nursing positions right now around the county. So they're going to be having a difficult time as they work through this process. This places us kind of, I would say, in the middle as far as other nearby counties for how they're responding to vaccine mandates in their various settings. On the one side of us, the more strenuous side of an implementation, we have the city and county of San Francisco, for example, who's basically classified all of their staff as high risk in Santa Clara's model, and told folks that they can't be accommodated with anything other than leave without pay until the end of the pandemic, which never going to happen, presumably at this point. On the other side, we have Alameda County, for example, and others which are letting, for example, even nurses be able to mask and test and have that be the accommodation for folks that have received their exemptions. So this process is going to continue to unfold. Right now, the county's not set any deadline for how long folks can be on that leave without pay status. For any of you that have those employees in your departments that are currently on leave without pay looking for a position somewhere else, there's no end date, at least of right now. At some point, the county will say, hey, if you've not been able to find a position, then eventually they're going to cut folks loose and say we've been unable to accommodate you. We don't know what kind of time frame that's going to be right now. Practically speaking, I imagine most folks are going to have difficulty finding positions. I think in many cases, it's going to be obvious why someone's, for example, on an unpaid leave of absence applying for a position in a department. And at least most managers that I know are not going to want to willingly bring on what's going to turn out to be likely another headache into their department. They likely already have some, just a more difficult situation to manage. So I think a lot of folks are going to have difficulty finding positions given they have to apply open competitive. But the county's been very firm that they're not going to take any other method as far as accommodation. That's significant from SEMA's perspective because that's a divergence from how the accommodation process normally works. For those of you that have been through the accommodation previously or have had employees placed in your departments as a result of accommodation, you'll know that it's often, Guy Newsom or someone else from the EOD office giving you a call and saying, hey, I've got an employee on accommodation who I'm going to place in your department. right? And they don't go through the hiring process. They're just placed there. With regard to the religious accommodations, the county's taken the perspective that to place somebody in a department as a result of a religious accommodation would be to engage in discriminatory behavior, because they would be discriminating positively towards someone as a result of their religion, and presumably against someone who may have wanted that position who didn't have a religion. And they specifically said that EEOC would not condone that, and they would see that as discriminatory. That doesn't make any sense to SEMA, given that EEOC specifically provides guidance to employers on how they can make an argument that it would be too burdensome to reassign someone as a result of religious accommodation, which presumes therefore that it's allowed and permissible, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be providing guidance on how the employer could say it's too burdensome to do so. And the county council is not saying it's too burdensome, they're just saying it would be discrimination and therefore it's illegal. At this point, that's likely not a fight that we're going to be taking up. As I've said, we found individual solutions for folks who have been impacted. And I think every case but one so far, and hopefully we'll find that we'll find a solution for that other one. That being said, the counties also refused to disclose to SEMA or any other unions how many folks and who have been impacted and placed on leave without pay, which is a complete aberration as well as far as we're concerned. County council has said this is a privacy concern from their perspective, that it would be disclosing someone's private information to say that they've been approved for an accommodation. And I think everyone who's a SEMA manager will recognize this, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because it's whether or not you're on an accommodation is not the protected information. It would be the reason why you've been approved for an accommodation that is protected information, which is not what SEMA or RMPA or SCIU would ever be requesting, right? In the same way you could think about this would be, it's permissible, for example, for you as an employer, as a manager, to know that one of your employees has FMLA, right? That's not a violation of their privacy to know they have FMLA. To know that Adam has FMLA because he has scoliosis, or because my son has diabetes, or whatever that is, whatever the reason could be, that would be protected health information, and that can't be disclosed. But the jurisprudence has been that it's never been a violation of privacy just to know that someone has, for example, FMLA or an accommodation, right? That's not the protected quality of that information. So the important point there is that if anybody on this call is impacted and has not yet reached out to SEMA, we would ask you to do so. You're absolutely entitled to representation in this process. As far as we know, everyone who's going through this and is classified as high risk and has an approved exemption has reached out to SEMA and gotten representation. But if you're not, or any folks that are SEMA members who have not reached out to SEMA, please encourage them to do so. If this is you, please reach out to us so that we can assist you in this process. I'll pause there for any questions before we move on to the next. Or Zeb, is there anything you'd like to add to my narrative there?
Yeah, just a couple of things. No, I think that was a thorough retelling of our current status. If there are supervisors or hiring managers on the call that are having challenges with staff that have applied for these accommodations and are out, or you're having to go through that disciplinary process, we want to help you in that as well. So please either put in chat whatever your questions or comments are. We're well north of the 50-person guideline, so please do not unmute, but just post your comments in chat. And the other issue or item I wanted to raise rather is we have represented some people through this process who are SEMA members that have been either put on leave or separated from the county with entirely different levels of success. In one circumstance, which I'm happy to report got resolved late last week, one of our members who is separated from employment actually due to a requested medical accommodation that was denied, did comply and got their vaccine and is about to complete that. It's not called incubation period, but the period after you get it's a 2-week period for the vaccine to become fully effective. So they're almost done with that fully effective period, and they will be resuming their job early next week. So that's something that we were very pleased to work out with the county about, but this is all on a case-by-case basis, much to our frustration. And I think when we get into the PERB charge update, you'll get a little bit more perspective on that. Also something, and I'm sure Adam mentioned it, I want to repeat it. Something that I want to highlight, and we always highlight whenever we discuss about the mandate. We understand SEMA is a pro-vaccine union. We are enormously vaccinated. Now the latest number that I've seen is north of 90%.
North of 95 now.
It's north of 95%. Okay, wow. North of 95% for full vaccination. And please do not construe our assertion of some of our members' rights with a positioning of SEMA as anti-vaccine. We certainly are not. It's an open question as to our position on the mandate. We certainly do not believe in the way the mandate was rolled out, which is a different thing than saying it ought not to happen at all. So please do appreciate that distinction. And we have an obligation as a union and as business reps to represent all of our members' rights in the workplace, whether we agree with them or not. So that's a foundational principle, union value and principle that we have to pursue regardless of whether we agree with that or not. And that's what we're doing vigorously on our members' behalf. I didn't see any questions on this topic, Adam. Do you see any?
No, I didn't see any either.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and move on to the third one. So this is an update on the perb charge. For any folks, and I don't think we've talked about this maybe for the last BMC site meeting or possibly two. So I'll just provide a quick refresher on this. 4 months back now, when the county was first rolling out the vaccine mandate, SEMA filed a perb charge over the process and the way in which it was rolled out. PERB, which is the Public Employees Relations Board, they govern relations between public sector unions and their employers. They provided guidance shortly before the vaccine mandates rolled out, directing employers and unions that the question of whether or not a mandate was put in place was not subject to bargaining with unions, but impacts of a vaccine mandate policy were subject to bargaining and had to be bargained prior to implementation of a vaccine mandate policy. So the county obviously didn't do that, despite SEMA and other unions' insistence that they do so. I think we all recall the kind of haphazard way this was rolled out, the lack of communication and confusion across departments. Following that, SEMA filed a PERB charge along with a request for it to be expedited. That request for it to be expedited was not approved. We're looking at, I think last week I spoke with our attorney, maybe like an April timeframe for the hearing. What that means is it significantly likely curtails what a possible relevant remedy for SEMA is in this context. One of the common remedies for PERB charges is often a required posting by the employer acknowledging whatever malfeasance they engaged in and committing to not do it again. They have to post it in public places, all over their sites as an employer. SEMA, for example, just won a PERB charge over at Santa Clara County Superior Court, where we have about 100 or so members. And there was a long pending PERB charge that resolved in our members' favor, and the court was required to post, near elevators and all over the place and in break rooms, what their violation was, how they violated it, and a commitment to not engage in that behavior again. Right. So that's always a relevant remedy. The practical realities of making the employer go back and bargain over impacts prior to implementation now is likely just a moot point. Right. Though we'll see when April arrives. The other thing we wanted to address is that I've had a number of managers reach out saying they heard from ESA or labor relations that the county had already prevailed in all the PERB charges against various unions that had filed them. SEMA's filed one, some of the public safety unions have filed some as well. That's not the case. What did happen is that other unions which filed requests for injunctive relief along with their PERB charges, those requests for injunctive relief were denied. That does not mean that those other unions' cases are not going to go forward. It just means that the request for injunctive relief was denied. A request for injunctive relief specifically is when you ask a court to say, hey, it's going to take some time for this hearing to go forward, but I'm being actively damaged in the amount of time that's whatever's going to happen between now and the hearing happens. So I'm asking the court to just immediately pause whatever I'm asking them to pause until the hearing arrives. So it's like do something immediately on the cursory evaluation that I'm giving you before the hearing happens. That was something that we considered submitting along with our request, but the advice we got from our attorneys is that she didn't see those requests as likely to succeed, just given other recent PERB holdings. and given what was going on with the vaccine mandates at the time. And that it would only delay the process because there'd first have to be, the review of the request for injunctive relief prior to moving forward with the actual case, so that it would be a waste of time and likely a loss. So I think that bore out to be true. But we did not file a similar request for injunctive relief. Other unions did. Those who did not prevail in those requests for injunctive relief, but their cases as well as SEMA's will still go forward. And the relevant remedies will likely be, things to do with postings and commitments to not engage in similar behavior again in the future. So that's where we're at with the PERB charge that was filed previously. We'll likely need to be submitting an update to a certain degree to get some more relevant information in there, given how this process with accommodations has rolled out. Part of the county's initial response to SEMA's PERB charge, the response to PERB in the initial filing was basically, to summarize it, saying, yes, we didn't bargain prior to implementation, but we're committed to, meeting and discussing everything moving forward with SEMA and other unions in good faith and so forth, right? And that clearly hasn't happened. For example, with the accommodation process, what the county seems to have settled on is, rather than rolling out things as an actual policy, which classifying positions as low, medium, or high as part of an accommodation process and then treating folks differently and accordingly to those designations, that's clearly a policy. It wasn't rolled out as a policy. It wasn't put in writing. It was just verbal or email direction given to departments. But simply deciding not to title something a policy doesn't absolve the county from an obligation to meet and confer in good faith over it with constituent unions. It obviously impacts working conditions. Nothing impacts working conditions more than what's effectively a policy that's going to tell you can't do your job anymore and you're de facto fired. But that seems to have been the county's new solution for getting around that process, is we're just not going to call it a policy. And clearly as well hasn't proactively reached out and hasn't agreed to meet or really addressed any of the concerns that SEMA or other unions have raised about that process. Including, for example, giving any kind of common sense guidelines to departments, like I said, about how one determines you classify a position as low, medium, or high, right? Is it that a high position should be one that interacts with patients who are likely to be sick or immunocompromised? Is it a position that interacts frequently with the public in confined spaces? Is a medium position one that occasionally may interact with members of the public and folks that aren't patients? I mean, just there was zero criteria given to departments, which just led to the kind of very inconsistent application of this non-policy and differential impacts on folks around the county, right? And unfortunately, like I said, it just runs contrary to the county's previous commitment for how they were going to handle issues moving forward. It just shows that was not a good faith response, or it was never intended, maybe. Not clear, but it just clearly hasn't happened. So definitely relevant information that we'll want to be able to address it at PERB as well. So we'll likely have to update the charge. This will likely be the last update we have on the PERB charge until around about April, which, as I said, is the time frame that we're looking at for the actual hearing. And again, just as something we can't say frequently enough, the goal of the PERB charge is not to have the county retract or not have a vaccine mandate policy, right? SEMA is overwhelmingly vaccinated. Members, based on the polling we've done, are overwhelmingly in support of a vaccine mandate policy. That's not the goal. The goal is to ensure that the county respects union and labor rights moving forward. We'll pause there again for any questions. You're muted, Zeb.
I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about the court PERB charge victory. And Adam framed quite well why it's so important for us to resist or enforce is probably a better word, our union rights. There's a set of laws called MMBA, Myers-Milius-Brown Act, which clearly establishes the rights of public employee unions in the state of California. And whenever those rights are trodden upon or violated, we have to push back on it. And that's what we're doing with this PERB charge, is we're making sure that the county respect it. As Adam pointed out, just declaring something's an administrative policy doesn't mean you don't have to negotiate about it, right? But there are many other things that we have to flex on PERB as well. Something we just won against the court, the Superior Court of Santa Clara, which, as you know, we also represent members in, was a retaliation case. It was where the court was found to have discriminated against one of our members for retaliatory reasons. In this circumstance, a member of the bench, as you may know, judges are very influential and powerful in the court as an employer, really had it in for one of our members. And all the way through the entire process, the court administration time and again ignored what they needed to do, including a Skelly officer finding that the punishment was inadequate, a workers' comp trial, a civil trial. And again, they just kept pushing on this issue, and then they ultimately lost. And as an embarrassment to the court, they had to post publicly a retraction and a statement that they had discriminated outside of all their courtrooms, as well as publicly through an email to all employees, as well as posted in public areas like, think break rooms, elevator bays, things like that. So that's also an example of where we really have to, in some circumstances, hold firm and beat up the employer where they're just in the wrong, so that the employer learns and then hopefully adjusts their behavior, which is what we're doing in this circumstance.
Yep. Let me see. Fourth item we have on here, something I got a lot of questions about in my email last week while I was off. Folks, and actually before as well, asking about implementation timing for the nurse raise. So as a reminder, SEMA nursing classifications are aligned with RNPA. What that means is that you get the better of whichever two raises are bargained between SEMA and RNPA. Historically, they've not recently been able to get larger yearly raises than SEMA, but we were able to get that 5% initial across the board realignment in year one of the contract, right? So there was significant value to that language in this contract. So we were able to get that treated as a de facto wage increase, right? But the other impact of that alignment language, right, is that your raise timing comes along with RNPA. I've found in the couple of years I've been here, there's always confusion about when exactly that is. And I think part of the reason is it's very confusing looking at the RNPA MOU to figure out exactly when their raises are coming. The place to look for that is to go to the very end of their contract in Appendix A. You look at the salary tables. Sorry, Zeb, what was that?
Yeah, the table. It's confusing.
Yes. Yeah. So you go to the table, and there's a new salary table for every year. And at the top of the salary table, it says the date it's effective. So for 2021, it says effective November 1st, 2021. So that's not the date on which your paycheck will go up. That's the date on which the hours that you're working from that point forward, you're getting paid the higher rate for. So it'll be the paycheck following that. You will see the raise reflected, but the hours you started working from November 1st moving forward for SEMA nursing classifications should be 3% higher. So that should be on the next paycheck then. Anyone who for some reason doesn't see one and is in a SEMA nursing classification, please reach out. I think usually every year there's at least one or two people that get missed that we have to go address. If that ends up being you this year, you're able to get it fixed retroactively, but reach out to us and let us know when you get your upcoming paycheck. I'm going to put a quick link in chat for anyone as to just where you can find the current RMPA MOU future. And again, like I said, place to look is at the end there in the salary tables. Unlike SEMA's contract, where all the raises are just kind of gathered in one location, and it says this year you get this raise on this date. There's nowhere in the RMPA MOU that says that. Kind of baffling. I don't know why they don't do that, but that's the way it's always been in the years that I've been here with their previous contract and this one. And yeah, that's where you look. It also doesn't say what the raise is. You can calculate it. We just know that it's 3% for the remaining years of the contract. I'll just hit briefly as a reminder, RMPA signed a 4-year contract, whereas we signed a 5-year one. I've got some questions about what that means. So right now there's a question mark effectively for what in SEMA's contract is year 5 for our nurses, right? If RMPA settles their contract prior to the date they normally get the raise, then that question mark just gets filled in, right? If they don't settle a contract on time and there becomes a gap there that we have to address, that's something that we'll have to address when our contract opens up the following year. And that's something I think we can commit will at least be a priority for us. Everything's always subject to bargaining, but that is something that we'll be able to address. And as a reminder, for example, that kind of lapse period there is part of what we were addressing with the the signing bonus in our last contract. And I guess coincidentally for our nurses, we had to go through the arbitration process, right, to actually ensure you guys got that. But we would look, for example, to get something similar if there, was a lapse in when they were able to sign a contract. But there is that question mark for what will be year 5 of SEMA's contract for our nurses. And we'll know more about what that's going to mean as that date approaches. Hey, Zeb, I got a private question here. Do you have the most up-to-date information on this? My understanding was the first pay period in December, but do you know when folks are going to get the hero pay?
Yes, the county says that it will be on the pay, that you will see it on your December 3rd, excuse me. You will receive the payment December 3rd. So what that means is you will get it in your paycheck that pay period, but as hopefully everyone recalls, you will not see it reflected on your pay notice or pay advice until the following pay period. And the reason I'm mentioning that is so frequently after we get whatever it might be, a pay raise or a particular settlement even, or like we're talking about right now, the hero pay, folks will check right on that date. And if they don't see it in their pay advice, then we get a text or a phone call or an email or something. What you want to do is check your bank account, right? Check your bank account, see if that was deposited. If you're looking at your pay advice, you're not going to see it until one pay period later. But December 3rd is the date.
Great, thanks, Ed. Let me pause there. Any questions on RNPA raise timing? Any questions or any concerns? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Zeb, do you want to give the update on Telework?
Sure thing. So as many of you know, we put out a Telework survey some time ago. I'm going to put a little bit of notice here in the chat. We have a few goals, and we have established a Telework working committee, which is comprised of SEMA members throughout the organization. And why that was important to us is to get folks from disciplines and areas where telework is working very well, and disciplines and areas where telework is being denied or not working well. So we have a pretty good representative body that I'm very satisfied with. I'm sure Adam is as well. But you can see here, I want to be clear, these are goals. We have no idea how successful we will be on these yet, and we've encountered some significant resistance already from the county. Dr. Smith committed to us that he would meet with us as well as labor relations and discuss a new telework policy that applies only to SEMA. So that was our original ask. Why only to SEMA? Well, because we believe SEMA is different and distinct from every other bargaining unit in the county, because we represent not only supervisors and managers, but journey level staff. Think knowledge worker, if that term means anything to most of you. And that differentiates us, right? There are some other groups that represent knowledge workers. GAA, General Attorneys Association, as an example, exclusively represents knowledge workers. But that means that many of our codes are uniquely situated to telework significantly. So you'll see here, we have several goals in meeting with the county. The first is to establish some minimums for telework participation for some roles. So how do we define that? And that's an important question. And we have proposed some language so that we can say this is the style of role that ought to be have access to some, not access, to be approved for some level of telework. And I want to be clear with that language. Why am I saying access? Not using the word access. Access just means you can ask for something, right? It kind of presents a false sense that you're going to get it. Our goal is to guarantee that some people will get this if they meet the criteria. That's going to be a heavy lift. So I just want to let you all know up front, it's a goal, but it's a super heavy lift. Some other things that we want that I think are much easier to achieve are to simplify the application process for both supervisors and applicants. So you put in for telework right now, Adam, I can't remember, are there 9 forms? Is it 8 forms? I don't remember.
I want to say 8.
8. There are 8 forms, and on each form, you have to fill out your name, your phone number, your work email address, your classification, where you work, who your supervisor, like simplify, we've consolidated that into one master form with multiple addendums, right? Oh, I need Clarinet access. I need to check out these laptops, things like that. Also, we're trying, so that's more procedural, clerical, but it makes the process easier and more streamlined. The other thing that's important is to make the telework more flexible, especially for SEMA style positions. So what does that mean concretely? For those of you that have filled out telework forms right now, you know that it is somewhat rigid in that it will say, for this pay period, what are you requesting off? I want Tuesday, and I want Tuesdays to be teleworked. Okay, well, many of us have very shifting responsibilities from week to week. So it's probably easier to administer and easier to flex if we said, you know what, let's just say 2 days a pay period telework, 4 days a pay period telework, whatever the number is, but we just tether that to the pay period. So it's not, oh, you missed Tuesday, fine, get out of here. You can't take it then, right? So it's more flexible. And this is for most jobs. I'm not saying every job in SEMA. We recognize that there are many positions in SEMA, a minority, but still many that do not lend themselves to telework. So that's where we're trying to change some of the thinking on that. Also, we're presenting an argument that the marketplace has shifted, right? For any of you that have friends, family, colleagues that are working in the greater Bay Area, you know that anyone who's touching technology is on a nearly 100% telework or something very, very close to that, maybe 80%. You come in 1 day a week. So that's something that has shifted over the past 5 years and was accelerated and hastened by the pandemic. So the marketplace has also shifted. For many of those codes, like at the hospital, right, you've got medical billers, you've got other niche codes that really have switched to majority, if not exclusively, telework. And we're also seeing that in a lot of the accounting type positions, the almost anything involving technology and building. So those are really going to that style as well. We want to make sure that that's known by county admin and by the board of supervisors.
Yeah.
And then
So,
the last point, oh, go ahead, Adam.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
The last point too is to encourage telework broadly, so that our level as well, SEMA supervisors and managers have in their mind, how can I make telework successful in my area? And if the answer is no, well, then you can't, right? But to at least approach it from the perspective of, how can I make it, how can I get some telework to my staff, as opposed to, will I be forced to give telework to my staff, which is a very different footing. And we're seeing that footing in some departments. So we want to make sure that telework is out there and that the thought process on it shifts significantly, and that we can establish metrics for success. So I don't think we're going to get there in this cycle. I think it will most likely have to be in the next contract. But it's really important that we get to a situation where we can ultimately address things like, how is hoteling going to be administered in the workplace? For those of you that are unfamiliar with hoteling, it's where you don't have a particular cubicle or office, but you get access to that, right? So maybe you work from home 4 days a week. You come in, you have your laptop that you plug into a port, but you don't have a dedicated office because for the most of the time you're working from home, right? So you come in and you plug it in. So that means that the long term, the county can have fewer offices, fewer cubicles, because on any given day, a much lower percentage of the staff is in the office. And that's real savings in terms of the physical footprint and plants, and it allows the county to lease out more spaces. So those kinds of nuances are also very important. I've got a couple of direct messages here. Thank you for addressing the marketplace shift. Hiring managers appreciate the attention, so do staff. Thank you. Hoteling is table stakes elsewhere in the Bay Area. Yeah, no, I do agree with that, especially in the tech industry. That's true. And I see some public questions, but I'll pause. I know, Adam, you were trying to say something.
Yeah, so the other point. So on day one of meeting with the county, we also put forward what we saw as a reasonable way to try to get a baseline minimum amount of telework for folks that weren't getting at least 2 days. And what that looked like was basically saying, hey, we know what positions were able to telework effectively at full time for almost a full year, right, during the lockdown. So there's very likely no reason that those positions can't be given at least 2 days. So the suggestion was basically next time any of those positions puts in for a renewal of telework or an initial application, if you teleworked full time during the pandemic or the same position your department did, then you're approved for at least 2 days. We didn't get an official response from the county yet on that, but kind of reading between their response to it, they didn't like the idea of a guaranteed minimum of telework, which we knew, but that's something we'll likely have to continue to push on and possibly in bargaining. But the county offered an initial suggestion, just kind of spitballing on something that might actually be productive for us to take them up on, which is that we have a small number of departments, 1 or 2 at VMC and then some elsewhere in the county where there's just really very little justification for why folks are still teleworking maybe only 1 day a week when folks doing the same job somewhere else in that same agency or somewhere else in the county are doing 3 or 4 days a week. And the response from the county was, we're not trying to be a county that, runs everything out of a policy. We want to build the ability for departments to sort these issues out on themselves. So maybe we could agree to bring, a mediator or an arbitrator or something like that in to work with departments and executives that are doing a bad job with telework. So it's an interesting suggestion, something that we'll definitely have conversation about and see if we think that'd be valuable to take them up on. We'd probably want to have some teeth to the process, but we'll have more information on that and wherever else we land as we meet some more at the county on this process. I got a couple private questions here, wanting to know were SEMA members involved in this process? Yes, there were. We had about 5 members who had volunteered to be part of this process. We put the call out at site meetings for a couple months saying who wants to be involved. And we had, let me see if I could run through, Donna Mensimer from Rhodes, Donna Kretcher from here at BMC, Isra Ahmad from the CEO's office, Saman Bella from the Sheriff's, and Bonnie Tanabe from Finance Payroll over at 70 West, as well as Zeb and myself. So kind of trying to bring a snapshot of folks around the county. And one of the concerns raised over a private message was wanting to ensure from a SEMA manager's perspective that we're still allowing that if someone's not teleworking effectively or they're having performance issues while teleworking, that the department's not still obligated to leave them on telework. Yeah, that's not something SEMA is ever going to push back on. That'll perennially be a facet of any telework policy. If Zeb says, hey, Adam, I called you, 5 times this last week and you never answered. I don't know where you were. You got to be in the office every day from now on. Just use as an example, obviously the county setting, that's, we don't see an issue with that, right? That's not something that we're going to be pushing back or fighting against. We want to ensure that SEMA managers are able to manage their departments effectively, and we're not looking to stand in the way of that. But telework has been overwhelmingly successful in almost every department. And there's a very small number of cases where folks have been not up to the level of professionalism required for telework in SEMA positions, right? Yeah.
I'm just responding to a question, and I'll address it as well in chat. So if you are denied for telework, you do not have a right to telework. Just to be clear, we're trying to establish that. It's a big lift. Like I say, it's unlikely to happen. But if you are denied for telework, you have a right to meet with your union or not. You can meet on your own. I recommend you take a union rep with you to discuss the reasons for denial, the business reasons for denial with whoever the denier is. That could be the supervisor or executive. And that's something that I would really encourage you to do. It makes a big difference, and it oftentimes I've found that after I'm able to talk with the hiring manager, they'll be like, well, I guess I see what you're saying. Maybe we can do it 1 day a pay period or something, and you start on that kind of lower level.
Yeah. To answer the question about HHS finance, Yes, so we met several times with execs about that, and that was one of the main examples we had in our initial meeting with Dr. Smith and John Mills around telework, that we have some of the areas that were temporarily reporting up to Paul from HHS Finance. Folks were offered 2 days, and some areas with folks reporting up through Renee were not, or in some cases offered 1 day. Whereas conversely, we have, for example, central finance over at 70 West, folks doing payroll are teleworking 4 and 5 days a week. And there's just really no good explanation of why that's the case. The response we got back from the county is that there's a lot of work right now in HHS Finance. So maybe when COVID's over, we can look at doing more telework, which is like a completely ludicrous response from my perspective. It doesn't make any sense. Not that it's funny. It was just kind of a laughable response from my perspective, at least, that presumably at least part of the reason to be doing more telework now is because of COVID. So saying we'll address it after COVID doesn't make any sense. And secondarily, that the ask is not to have people not work while they're at home, right? It's to have them telework. And we know, for example, that HHS Finance successfully saw VMC through layoffs and turned over the fiscal year while on full-time telework. So it's not like we don't know that it's effective, right? So in that case, and in the meeting, Dr. Smith specifically said he'd be happy to get involved in that area, for example. It's not something we took him up on yet. We're trying to look for kind of across the board solution. But if we don't get there, that's something we might take him up on. Or like I said, the offer of doing some kind of mediation or getting some high level central county executive to come in and kind of parlay in departments where we're having trouble to arrive at a better situation might be where we land on this. Yes, more updates to come on that, but no progress yet on the HHS Finance issue other than Jeff's initial offer there.
And Adam, I'm getting a private message. Maybe you can address this better than I can. I'll address it generically, but maybe you have some special information. This is about ambulatory care, saying a blanket email went out canceling all telework effective 2 months ago, but some staff are still teleworking while others are being flatly denied. So I'm not sure what the difference is between being approved and flatly denied. There is an ability for let me phrase it another way. Sorry, let me back up. I can't tell on the basis of the private message if this is appropriate or not. So a possible appropriate reaction from a department would be, the pandemic is the stay-at-home order has been lifted. I want everyone back in the office. All previously approved teleworks are canceled. Do I agree with that position? Absolutely not. Is that within somebody's right to do? Yes. Okay. So that kind of addresses, can people be called back? The second part of the question is, some people are being allowed to telework and others are not. As long as it's on the basis of their role, again, that could be appropriate. I can't say on the basis of the question. If 2 people have identical job responsibilities and one is being allowed to telework and the other isn't, then that's a disparity where Adam or I can get involved, and that makes a lot of sense. If it's like, well, I'm bedside nursing and this other person is ICD-10 coding, and I'm being told as a bedside nurse, get your tuchus in and do your job, and the ICD-10 person is being told work remotely, that could be totally appropriate. I just don't know.
I'm not aware of a blanket across the board ambulatory denial, and I know plenty of folks in ambulatory who are teleworking. There's some individual departments that we've had some meetings on, quality, for example. But yeah, like Zeb said, if we're not actively having a conversation about your area and you think you should be teleworking, feel free to reach out. And if there was a denial or with the return to work, there's nothing stopping folks from putting in a telework request now, an application for moving forward. And most folks who did have applications out there, the county's wanting to review them on every kind of 3 to 6 months. So folks will need to be continuing to submit ongoing telework requests as the current ones lapse.
I'm getting
I wanted to tack one more thing on, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, answer the other question. I have a hero pay question.
You can answer the hero pay one.
Okay, so the hero pay question was about partial codes. The hospital has not a lot, but compared to other departments.
I answered that one in chat for the individual.
Okay, I got a direct message.
Oh, okay.
From a different one.
Okay.
So this is I'm a part-time code. It doesn't matter what part they are, right? Not full-time. But I have been working full-time as a practical matter. Am I eligible for the higher pay working full-time, or do I get my part-time? The way that it is written is that you would get the part-time. If the county chooses to give you more, great, take the money and run. But what the board passed and what the county has written as how it will administer it is they will give you what you are. So pretend you're a 0.6, you get 0.6. Imagine 0.6 times 2,500. I don't know what, they can't do that in my head. 0.6 times 2,500, that's what you get, right? That's what you're entitled to. If you're working full-time and your boss pushes for you or says some connections in ESA, good for you, but you're entitled to the 0.6.
Mhm. I'm getting a couple other requests for kind of individual issues on telework. Just as a reminder, if your department ever wants to bring a telework issue or concern that you're unable to resolve at your level up to our monthly labor management meeting, folks are always welcome to attend that with BMC executives in O'Connor and St. Louis. So for any of the folks reaching out having difficulty within their department, because as Zeb said, it is discretionary, and a manager or director can use their discretion to approve or deny. So if there's any areas having trouble and you want to escalate, please let me know. We can get that on the agenda for, I think, our meetings next week, the next one, and a month after that, and so on and so forth. Last thing I wanted to tack on real quick was just blast this training back out to folks. About a year ago, we did a training that we put up on YouTube, which was kind of how to understand the classification study process. So in December, you'll see an e-blast come out from SEMA with the application process for the classification study batch for 2022. As a reminder, we'll get 30 slots to do new classification studies with a guaranteed 1-year turnaround time. Like I said, we'll have applications out in December. We'll likely be collecting them kind of end of January, beginning of February to review them before submitting to ESA. I'm linking here. It's an unlisted YouTube video, so you need the link to it. Please don't forward it around because it's kind of our analysis of how we think ESA thinks about the class study process and kind of how they prioritize and value things. But it's a 2-hour training on kind of how to maximize the class study process. Be helpful to watch for anyone who's thinking about putting a code in or putting a classification study request in the coming year. And like I said, we'll have the applications out in December for folks. You can find time to watch that 2-hour training. I think it'll be instructive and helpful for when you fill out that application. There's a question here from Marianne about position posting. Yeah, and I think your question, Marianne, was whether things and why things are sometimes differentially posted as transfer, promotion, or open competitive. And the answer to that is, unlike SEIU or RMPA, where there's a requirement to post in a certain order, it's discretionary on the department's side for SEMA level positions, how they want to go about posting that. We'd always encourage folks to post positions, transfer or promotion prior to posting open competitive, but they're not obligated to do so. And there's plenty of chicanery in various departments that will go on to deciding how things are getting posted in a certain way. That's frequent and inevitable and happens around the county, and I would fully believe that's happening in any given department. But it's not a violation of the contract policy or anything like that. You muted, Zeb.
I did see a question about extra help and per diems. I frankly, I don't remember. We don't represent extra help or per diems, so I haven't paid much attention as to how that impacts those staff. Do you remember what the board order says about extra help or per diems, Adam?
I just know that it covers them, and it wasn't obligated to cover them by how the direction from the Department of the Treasury or whoever authorized this. There was some specific directive to employers, and it left out extra help type positions. Obviously, that's a homebrew term we have, but those kind of hourly per diem positions were left out, and the county decided nonetheless to include payment to those folks. But that means that it's entirely up to them how they want to decide. I would assume it's going to be prorated based on the number of actual hours worked in those 2 months. It was like a June to June timeframe or something they defined. That would be the easiest way for them to do it. That's probably what they'll do, but I don't know for a fact how they're going to do it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.